Okay, welcome everyone. I told myself we'd start when we hit 80 participants, and here we are at 84, so I can freely start. My name is Eva Jackson. I'm Managing Director with ICLEI Canada. I'll be doing the majority of the talking today until we get to the Q&A, where I hope folks will have lots of questions. So I'll go ahead and share my screen now and start the presentation. Again, thank you for joining us. We are so excited to be launching in a virtual way Climate Insight. This is what we're calling a quick online training session just to give people a chance to have a look and maybe a bit of a guided tour of what is in on Climate Insight, which we sometimes refer to as the platform. So if you hear me say that, I am referring to Climate Insight. I note that my colleagues had put into the chat if you would like a translation, it is available today using Wordly. You can scan the QR code or copy and paste this URL, which I believe is also in the chat. Click the language you would like and hit attend, and then you'll be able to read and or listen if you have your headphones available to you. So I hope that you will be able to log into that. Please feel free to put into the chat if you are having any difficulty. Before we start, I want to acknowledge that ICLEI Canada's work happens across Turtle Island, which has traditionally been and is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples since time immemorial. I myself am located on the territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, or what I call Toronto. I'm thankful for the stewardship and the care of the land that I get to live and work on, and I will endeavor to listen and to learn from Indigenous peoples in an ongoing way in the process of my work and as I spend time on this land. As we get started, I believe through the magic of Zoom, we have a little poll that'll pop up that should ask where you folks are coming from and whether you're joining us working from within a municipality, as a practitioner or an elected official, whether you work for provincial or federal government, nonprofit. So we ask that you take a second and just click in through that. I think there are a couple of questions, so I imagine you have to click next or advance, but hopefully that's working. There we go. It looks like people are answering the questions. Not surprisingly, given our network, we've got a lot of municipal practitioners on the line, and then a good number of folks from a nonprofit sector that supports municipalities, as well as some provincial and federal government partners. So welcome to all of you, coming from a variety of different municipalities, ranging from under 25,000 to 25,000 to 100,000, and a good amount in rural communities, which we're excited to have join remote communities, and of course those communities coming in from the north. So I welcome all of you, and I'm very excited to be able to share this. I'm going to end this poll now because I think we have a good amount of responses, and I appreciate your participation in that. So what are we here to launch? Climate Insight was designed to serve as a go-to destination for relevant, and I really stress this word, actionable information on building climate-ready public housing and infrastructure. I say actionable because we all realize we need to make progress on new public housing and new infrastructure that is ready for a climate-adjusted future and that minimizes its impact on climate through moving towards net zero and energy efficient building. So Climate Insight is meant to provide information that can be used to support decision making right away. It is freely available online. Hopefully most of you have at least seen the URL and gotten a chance to go on the site. And again, is meant to provide that data information needed. We feel that it fills a need for Canadian communities, and particularly those that are smaller and perhaps with less capacity to engage in research efforts and data acquisition, by bringing together information around understanding climate risks, understanding emissions, and ultimately to helping find the infrastructure and housing solutions needed to meet those challenges. I will say that it is part of a bigger story. Climate Insight is one component of Housing Infrastructure and Communities Canada Climate Toolkit for Housing and Infrastructure, which we call the Toolkit in shorthand, where any community, be it large, small, Indigenous, urban, or rural, northern and remote, can find information through either a one-to-many service like Climate Insight, where you can log in and go at your own pace, or through some of the support services of the toolkit, like the help desk, which is run through Housing Infrastructure and Communities Canada, or the newly launching Climate Ready Infrastructure Services program, which will match municipal users with experts around consulting services that are funded through HICC. For Climate Insight, again, the online portal, the online component of this toolkit, we've designed this as year one of a 4-year journey. Unlike many projects where traditionally you build something and you work on it until it's finished and then you release it, we've launched an initial release. So phase 1, you might call it. And we've designed it to bring user feedback around Climate Insight's features, functions, and content at the heart. So we have another 7 releases planned between now and March 2028. So if you see a gap in content, if there's something you'd really like to have that, if we had access to this data set, we invite you to get in touch with us, because we are, as I said, at the start of our launch journey and not at the end. So what you're seeing today is the first of a total of 7 or 8 releases, I believe, that we hope will grow to better serve the community of municipalities that we're looking to help. So without further ado, I'm going to switch gears here, and bear with me as I minimize one screen and drag over another screen to show you folks a bit of a guided demo. If you feel so inclined, you're welcome to do this demo along with me and use your own monitors and screens and whatnot. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to find my notes here. They are on something below. There we go. So you can either follow along with me or just go to climateinsight.ca and kind of navigate along with me as I do it on this screen. So as I said, we are designing this to be one of the go-to destinations for information on climate-ready infrastructure and housing. As I may have quickly mentioned, we see this as serving a one-to-many need within that broader toolkit concept, where at your own pace you can come discover the information that is here. So I'll start perhaps with the geospatial map, and my apologies if I'm switching my gaze between screens, but the map is really meant to be illustrative. We wanted to bring together some proxy climate information, so not to in any way supersede a comprehensive review of climate data, but present some proxy climate data to represent a few climate hazards, and bring that together with socioeconomic information and information around public infrastructure. So we have, of course, a disclaimer saying that you understand that this is an illustrative purpose and doesn't represent a comprehensive review of climate data. And then, of course, it won't work when I want it to. We will try again. Here we are. Just a glitch in the matrix, as it were. And then you can just put in your community. I'm going to choose Fredericton, New Brunswick, and the map will zoom in to my location. For the purpose of this demo, I'll zoom out a little bit so we can see. And here is where one gets to play a little bit with the information that's on the map. I'll just zoom in again. Looking at climate data, we are showing climate data for three timescales. So the baseline period, 1971 to 2001, mid-century, and then end of century. And then you can layer that information with other pieces. So currently, I'm only looking at the Social Vulnerability Index. The Social Vulnerability Index is an amalgamated index that is pulled from the Government of Canada, which measures a few parameters of social vulnerability together to put into one index. This, again, we are using currently as a proxy layer. In future iterations, the map will break out different elements of what typically constitutes vulnerability. So whether that's income, newcomer status, age, we will break those out to be separate layers in future iterations. For the time being, it is this amalgamated layer. But you can pair this, and this is where it gets a little bit interesting, with temperature. So for example, if we want to look at social vulnerability paired with temperature of days of more than 30 degrees, you get this bivariated information. So again, we're looking at a baseline period. If we're thinking about end of century, we can start to see that areas that are darker blue and green have more frequent days with temperature above 30 degrees and high social vulnerability, and days that are in lighter shades of yellow. Oops, excuse me. I'm clicking too much. Are with lower vulnerability and fewer days above 30 degrees. When this becomes particularly interesting is when we add another data point in here, which is around infrastructure. So for example, we might look at public transit stops, and we can start to, and again, where I said this was for illustrative purposes, you can start to think about, you know, if we're planning for more public transit in the future, we can start thinking about where these stops are located, who might be using them, and what supports we might need to put in around these public transit stops to make them more more usable for that audience. So for example, if we know that there's higher social vulnerability, we may need to put in more benches because we have more users using this. We might have to put in more shade structures if they're hot days and their folks are particularly exposed to that sun risk. You can then change this to look at pedestrian cycling infrastructure, bridges and tunnels, and those will appear. You might need to zoom in and out. You can also then click on an individual point to see what it is referencing to. So this is a footbridge on Union Street in New Brunswick, and you can start thinking about how you may need to adapt this piece of infrastructure. And again, you can imagine as we release new data and new data layers into the map, that this will become less and less for illustrative purposes and perhaps be able to support decision making a bit more. So again, that is just a quick overview of the map. When moving to the library, this is a more traditional feature, I think, of these types of data portals, where users can use different filters to call attention to a specific type of resource. So for example, we might be considering climate change mitigation, and maybe we want code standards and guidelines that are related to climate mitigation. And so the way that the library is structured is it's designed in these what we're calling cards, where a user can click on a piece of click on a resource. This is about Canada Standards Association, and this is referring to the design of concrete structures using this code. And then there are some details about what this is, and then in the end you can log out to it. The idea being that you can create your own portfolio of cards, as it were, of issues that you are related in. For example, you may not want codes, you may want case studies related to mitigation. You could then select this that you want case studies related to climate change mitigation and buildings and housing, and it'll triage that for you. So again, with case studies, the same idea. You can open that up, and it gives you a little bit of information about the case, some details about it, and considerations of what this case is on, and then of course linking out to that case. You'll see that for right now, things are just opening in new tabs for me across the top. In our second release, which is coming up very quickly in April 2025, we'll be building a save and login feature. So you'll be able to create a username, some very quick profile conversations, and you'll be able to save your own catalog of the cards that you're interested in, or maybe that you'd like to share with your colleagues. For right now, in these case studies and codes, they're shareable through a print or print to PDF feature, sending an email, or creating a bookmark link. So that is very much an interim solution until we have that login and save feature available. So you can see here that you can look at different types of content that has all been triaged. It has been analyzed by somebody on our team to create this annotated view of that resource, so you can determine whether you want to dig deeper on that. The same is true for the different tools that we've highlighted. So these are tools that are included on climate change mitigation here. And we don't just link you directly to it. We have that preliminary card page that gives you a sense of what this tool is about and who it might be most beneficial for. Perhaps the piece that we're most excited to launch is what we're calling the Solutions Finder. So this is using a decision tree model. It's helping users get to the different infrastructure and housing solutions that they might want to consider for their community. So again, just some simple questions here. I'm sitting in Toronto, so I will select the appropriate questions here. I'm going to loop back to the Help Me Understand section in a second, and just go through the options to address. Now, again, I live in Toronto. None of these options apply to my community, but you could use these to already pre-filter out for your community if you happen to be in an Indigenous community or a Northern community, options that are appropriate for your jurisdiction. I am concerned about adaptation. Currently, we have information related to flooding, extreme heat, wildfire, and permafrost thaw. I'm just going to choose flooding. And again, just a simple question and answer following that, overland flooding. And this is where one gets to think about, well, what am I concerned about with overland flooding? Users choosing this pathway likely already have a sense of their vulnerabilities and risks. Maybe they've carried out a vulnerability and risk assessment. Maybe they've participated in a workshop and are now interested to learning more. We're going to continue on our transportation journey. And all of these questions that we're answering, what they're meant to do is in the back end, they're filtering down to fewer and fewer options. So you're not presented with a long list of 160 infrastructure options, but ones that might be more relevant to your location. So I'm thinking about a single road in my community. You know, I want to do direct alterations to the asset. I'm open to either above ground or below ground. And I'm thinking about actions I can take into the short term. So again, what opens up to me are options that have made it through that filter criteria. So maybe I want to learn more about roadway erosion controls. So you can see, again, another one of these cards. This is an options card. It is an infrastructure option that I can consider. And then some preliminary information about this. What is this option? Some information about how it works. And I'll leave you to find these on your own to read through. Considerations. So considerations around costs, factors affecting the feasibility of this, any co-benefits or trade-offs of this option, and as well as equity and diversity factors. Where we have case studies of this type of option, we try to link to that so that, again, you can see in real life how this infrastructure option was used and then be able to jump between that. So you can see how if you're interested in taking a holistic view, you might look at different infrastructure options, then look at the code standards and guidelines related to those infrastructure options, excuse me, as well as any case studies of those being implemented. And the idea behind presenting it in this way is not that you're ready to put out, a tender to look at roadway or erosion control structures, but more that you as a user are ready to have a deeper, more grounded conversation with your colleagues in, asset management, engineering and public works, or maybe with consultants that you're working with around, are we considering this type of intervention? And again, this is where I should reiterate that we are really only at release 1. As we add more options, as we add more content, as we add more case studies, you can see this becoming more and more robust. So I promised that I would circle back to that learn and understand portion. Finding solutions is one piece once you already understand the risks for your community and or perhaps what your emissions profile for your community looks like. If you're not quite there, or you're working with communities that are in the earlier stages of climate action, we have these learn and understand pages that are meant to offer a bit of insight into how to think about these issues. So I just clicked on, getting to know climate change risks. There's a bit of introductory text here, as well as some key pieces to think about. In a future release, we'll be building what we're calling a rapid risk assessment tool that, through answering a series of questions, can give you a sense of what your community's risks might be, as well as to paint a picture of that. Until then, we have built a decision tree that can help you find the risk assessment methodology that might be most suited to your jurisdiction and what it is that you're trying to accomplish through that risk and vulnerability assessment. Whether it's just looking at assets, whether it's looking at the broad community from a bottom-up approach, a top-down approach, with external support, without external support, and all those pieces. So again, these learn and understand pages right now are limited to these 5 subject areas, but this could grow in the future as we learn and get a better sense of what the needs in communities across the country are. And then finally, before I switch to any question and answer and dialogue, we have our support page, which at the moment links to the Climate Help Desk through Housing, Infrastructure and Communities Canada. So you can go here, it takes you directly to their page, and you can access the help desk that way, or to accessing the Climate Ready Infrastructure services, which is again that matchmaking service that is officially opening on December 5th. But if you are interested, I'm sure you can reach out to now to get onto their list, that once they have their public launch, they would be happy to get in touch. There are other elements that we're looking to add. So we'll be adding a training center that offers not only recorded trainings, but opportunities when we're in your region to attend a deeper dive training session to really understand and help vision towards what a future climate insight could look like, as well as any conferences where climate insight might be. Perhaps I'll end the demo by saying that if you are interested in staying up to date as new content is being added, we add new content once a month. So that's new case studies, new resources, new options, and those major releases that will be releasing new functionality are every 6 months. So it really is a highly, highly evolving site. And I would encourage you to get in touch and stay in touch with any features or functions that you are hoping to have added. So perhaps I'll leave it there, and I'll ask my colleagues to help me navigate the chat if there's any questions, or happy to take questions.
Thanks very much, Eva. Sure, I am happy to pass on some questions that are coming in from the Q&A function so that you can answer them in real time. So one that came through, which I've heard previously, was a question about the Social Vulnerability Index. The question is, can you speak more to what ICLEI considers social vulnerability? And I think that that might be a good opportunity to speak a bit more about where that data is coming from that's populating the map.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Thanks, Adrian, for helping us navigate the Q&A. The data is coming from Statistics Canada and their amalgamated layer called the Canadian Index of Multiple Deprivations. It's a body of work that took multiple aspects of social vulnerability. So I mentioned a few, such as income, newcomer status, age, and brought them together into one index. We were working on a very tight timeline to get a first release out. And so we used this as proxy information to represent social vulnerability, knowing that it was developed by the Government of Canada. And this is a site that's supported through the Government of Canada. What we would like to do now is to actually break that apart to make it a bit more useful. So if you think about the example I gave, talking about public transit stops, for example, in a priority neighborhood, in order to make those public transit stops the most useful, you need to understand what aspects of vulnerability the users of that public transit are experiencing, what makes them more exposed, for example, to climate. So if it's age, you might need more benches. If it's related to another aspect, you might need more frequent stops so that there's not as great a distance. If it's about mobility and accessibility, you might need to provide water at different bus stops. You might need to think about having indoor bus stops. So by breaking that out into individual layers to understand social determinants of health, which typically we see as affecting vulnerability, you'll be able to use that to make a better decision around whether it's public infrastructure or active transportation, so bike and pedestrian corridors. I hope that helps.
Great, thanks very much, Eva. I think I'll just go through the questions top to bottom. So if we don't have time to answer your questions, please also feel free to put them in the chat. And I would invite a couple other ICLEI colleagues. You can also answer in the Q&A section just via text if there's any quick answers here.
So Sherry, one of them, Josh, I'll invite you to do that if there's any quick answers into the chat while I talk.
Sure. So the first question that came up was about why baseline dates are 1971 to 2001 and mid-century is 2041. Is that also related to the source of the data?
It is. Our friends at the Canadian Centre for Climate Services, we worked very closely with them in deciding how to present climate data, which climate layers to present, and which variables and timelines to present. They gave us very clear guidance that these are the 3 time scales that we should be presenting. Baseline to provide a current perspective, mid-century, as many infrastructure decisions have a timeline of about 20 years, 15 to 20 years, and then end of century for infrastructure that has a longer lifespan. So that was a decision that we are not climate data experts and climatologists, so we sort of just sought guidance from those that are very actively working in the nuance of that space as to what timescales we should provide.
Great, thanks, Eva. And of course, if there are more questions that come up while we speak, please feel free to put them in the chat, in the Q&A, to respond in the chat. All of that is also open. The next question that came up was, will there be considerations for the conservation of energy in the building envelope and the potential for renewable energy in the context of resiliency, something like passive houses or net zero strategies? Has that come up yet?
It has. So again, and I won't do the whole path because you'll probably just get sick of watching me click, but we could select, Andy, I know you're located in Ontario, so I'll select Ontario here. If we clicked options to address, you could select mitigation and it would be showing you those options related to reducing emissions from buildings, for example, or other aspects of mitigation. So you could choose your asset class there. I just, for the purposes of a 20-minute demo, couldn't choose all the different pathways. I believe when last I spoke to folks on the team, they were saying that there are literally like tens of thousands different option pathways you could choose based on if you click this and not that, and then click this and not that. So there really is not quite an infinite, but it feels like an infinite amount of pathways you could get down.
Perfect. There's one question that was already answered in part by Sherry, but I just thought that I would jump in perhaps and give your voice a break, Eva, which was the question about the opportunity to provide input by users. Yes, absolutely. This is, as Eva mentioned, this is very much an iterative process over the next several years. We have feedback forms that are coming out, feedback surveys, where people can let us know what is and is not working on the tool for them, what they want to see next, how it's supporting your work. So the best way to make sure that you'll get access to that is to firstly make use of the tool, and also to make sure that you're subscribed to our email list. And in the interim, you can always contact us at info@climateinsight.ca, and that email Sherry already put into the Q&A portion, so you should just be able to copy and paste it. All right, the next question back to you, Eva. Is this tool legislated and accepted by the local government for real life application? And if so, is there any legislative document available to present to communities for authentication?
Yeah, I think this is getting into the, who who takes the brunt of it for these solutions. And it's really challenging. I mean, I would avoid saying, is this legislated to use? What we're trying to do is, based on the small amount of information we're getting from a user, provide a list of options that could be considered. We're not trying to say, this is exactly what you, a user, should do to address riverine flooding in your community. We're saying these are options that address riverine flooding. Now, what I will say is, in our next iteration, we're trying to get less from just, a short list of options, to understand, based on what you've told us, this might be the most relevant option for you. So we're going to ask a few more questions to make the options more relevant. And as we move through to future iterations. So while I will say the options were developed and the cards were written by engineering consultancies, we worked closely with Mott MacDonald and WSP on developing all of the options cards, so the 170 odd cards that are in there now. It's hard to say that, we can provide sort of a legal background around the use of these cards. There is a terms and conditions document on the site, but that is really around the terms and conditions of using the site. So we can provide information on how the cards were developed. I believe that's in the frequently asked questions section on the website, but it's hard to say that we can provide a legislative context for their use. It really is meant to provoke conversations and to connect the people who are building this type of infrastructure with climate information where those maybe aren't connected in all cases.
Perfect. Now we have a bit of a specific map question that I know also came up in a previous conversation, which is, if we navigate back to the map, is it possible to click on multiple climate hazards layers at the same time? And if not, was there either reasoning behind that, or is that something we expect to come in future iterations?
Oh, time is a fickle friend. Time was the problem. We are trying to find a way to let people work across multiple hazards, not only in the map, but also in the solutions finder. So for example, if you're concerned about heat and flooding, right? So if you have a flooding event in a heat wave, that constitutes a different set of options to address it, as well as in the map. So it's something that we're working towards. As I said, we launched this first iteration of the site between February and October of this year. And October 2024 is a far way away from March 2028. So that's exactly the type of information that Adrian was mentioning we'd love to hear. If you're really interested in stacking hazards and stacking information to understand the relationship between those things, we'd love to know that, so that we can build that into our future release plans.
Perfect. There's lots of very specific questions in here, which are great. Eva, is this working for me to just keep on pelting them at
I mean,
you.
I see the next one around emission factors and emissions of roadway structures, and I'm going to look at my dear colleague Josh to see if he wants to tackle that question, or Sherry, who are much more in the weeds than I am. Or if we skip that one, maybe somebody can answer it written.
I'm in the middle of answering it
Appropriate.
written up, so.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sherry. Apologies,
I
I am not an emissions expert, and so I don't think I'd do that question justice.
I will, since you called my name, jump in on another question though from Ruth. Um, if I don't know, can everybody see the questions? It's about a data dictionary or documentation. Just while we're talking about this, I thought it was probably important to answer this one live for everybody. So the answer is yes. We have a data sources and methodology page that I hope covers all of the questions that are part of your question, Ruth. Understand where the layers are coming from and any considerations or limitations. So there is a bunch of text there. And if you really want to get into the weeds, at the very bottom of the map section accordion, there is an additional embedded PDF document that really gets into the details of all those things. Just that very last little bit there. So yes, and I think that's just an important flag for everybody on the call. If you want more info about where the data came from and what we've done with it, there you go. So there is currently one for the map and for the baseline emissions calculator tool. And we'll certainly keep this updated as things are changing from a data perspective on the site. So thanks, Ruth. I thought that one was important to answer for everybody.
Thanks, Josh. Gave me a break. I got to be Vanna White for that one.
Great. Next is a question about looking to the future and if ICLEI has thought yet about how the website could be used for post-secondary institutions and instructors of future planners, engineers, etc. And if we have any plans already in the works to show this to students and to promote it via educational networks.
Yeah, we would love to. There is nothing in here that couldn't be used by anybody from across sectors. As anybody knows who has built a website, you have to pick a target audience and you have to pick somebody you're designing for. So in our case, that is folks from municipalities. But all of the information in here, I think, would be very pertinent, whether you're a student pursuing your degree, whether you're working in a nonprofit and supporting municipalities, or a consultancy and supporting municipalities, or even a non-municipal infrastructure owner and operator, for example, a post-secondary institution. If I think about the University of British Columbia, it is a mini city, right? They have their own fleet, they have their own buildings, they have their own roads. All of the infrastructure options here could be appropriate. In terms of presenting it to a wider audience, that's another piece that I think we'd love to have input on. We've connected in with some of the professional associations whose members certainly are engineers or planners working in municipalities, but they're also new graduates and young professionals from across the profession that may participate. So we're trying to find those training opportunities across the disciplines as well. We haven't connected formally to the engineering or planning schools yet, but I think that could be an interesting next step. And if people have ideas or if people are participating in conferences, we'd be happy to stay connected and find out about those opportunities. It's hard to have your finger on the pulse of all of them in a country as large as ours.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it also reiterates the point we were saying earlier that this is meant to be, in conversation with the users. There was another question here about whether searches could be done on a regional scale within a province. So not provincial or municipal, but more on this kind of regional scale.
If that means within the maps are presented at the dissemination area scale. So it's smaller than census subdivision, but bigger than, blocks, for example. So that's the scale that they're presented in. In terms of what one types, I think, you could type a smaller jurisdiction and then zoom up to the region. So for example, if we just jump into the map and I'm thinking about where I am. Thank goodness it worked now. I had a bit of a scare that first time. And I put in Huntsville, but I'm thinking about more, the Muskoka district. One could just zoom out and the information would be presented. I wouldn't have the physical boundary marked of the Muskoka Township in this example, but I also wouldn't for the municipality because the municipality is covered by multiple dissemination areas. So I hope that answers the question. I think it was in reference to the map. For the solution finder right now, it's just choosing by province. There is no ability there to sub-distinguish by a region other than saying one is northern.
Great, thanks very much, Emma. This next question, I am going to have to read verbatim because I have to admit that I do not know what one of these acronyms is. So I'll just read it out to you.
My
Oh
dear
yeah,
friend
okay.
Brian tricked us with an acronym. Maybe Brian in the chat, you could explain the acronym to us.
Unless Josh or Sherry knows what this question is referring to, then you can feel free to jump in.
Possibly GTP. I don't know if I keep getting the acronym mixed up, but is possibly one of the AI query interfaces. Maybe we can just leave that one until Brian can. Oh yes, okay, I see Brian's comment. So are we considering sort of building in an AI query interface to help summarize information that's in Climate Insight?
I'll say we're not considering it. I think right now we're just still such early days. So I think there's a lot of opportunity around AI. We had to have some basic functionality. I think the search feature, which I didn't mention that we're building in, as well as the save and login, are again extensions of that basic functionality. But the developers we're working with, I think, would have an openness to that. We just have to make sure it's serving towards the right purpose and that we can filter out those worries of using some of that AI functionality that I think came through with that legislative question earlier. Can we stand behind that? Right now, we're putting in a lot of effort with working with very reputable engineering firms that have done a lot of work with municipalities to ensure the content is as curated as possible and defensible. That would be my only concern, but perhaps shows my naivete with AI. So I think I'll stick with my initial answer of we're not considering it, but don't have a firm position yet.
Perfect. Now there's, I think I see 3 different questions here that in some way or another touch on the integration of Indigenous knowledge, data, and working with Indigenous partners. I'm wondering if someone from the Climate Insight team could speak a little bit more to how we are or are planning to be working with Indigenous partners.
Yeah, this is a great question. And right now for example, for the map, we're really limited by the content that's available through Statistics Canada. And this is an area where we want to improve. And so we've been working with colleagues or connecting with colleagues at the University of Winnipeg and the Prairie Climate Center, as well as at PIX out at UVic, University of Victoria, who are working more closely around a toolkit for Indigenous climate and Indigenous owned infrastructure. And so we're trying to understand how better to link that and how to get better information that's equally as usable, but doesn't break any privacy information. So one of the challenges with going at the dissemination area, if it's a low population, there's real privacy considerations, which is why there's some gray spots in the Canadian Index of Multiple Deprivations, for example. On the infrastructure layer, the infrastructure data that I was showing earlier, and again, sorry, I will zoom out and turn on a more appropriate infrastructure layer here. So we might look at bridges and tunnels, for example. All this information is provided through the Open Database of Infrastructure, which is compiled in two parts. It's held again by the Government of Canada, and it's compiled by voluntary reporting from local governments, as well as sort of skimming of the internet to find where public infrastructure is. So that where there are gaps, we'd encourage you to report that through to Housing, Infrastructure and Communities Canada, and it can get populated into the map. So that would apply, of course, in Indigenous communities as well as in local governments. We were at a training session we had done. We had two people sitting at a table who were from neighboring municipalities, and the one half of the municipality had all this great pedestrian and cycling infrastructure, and the woman said, well, wait, we have that in our community, and it just wasn't reported in. And so it became clear that she was very keenly going to report her data so that it could get populated into the map as well.
Great, thanks very much. Another question that maybe I can pass to either Josh or Sherry, who are a bit more in the weeds. There's two questions here about different solutions. Right now, a lot of the solutions that we've shown in this demo have been engineering related solutions, and there's questions about whether there are or will also be land use planning solutions, as well as nature-based solutions and other natural infrastructure solutions.
So nature-based solutions are already included where they represent an infrastructure solution. So for example, bioswales or stormwater ponds and things like that. Where what we've done is policy interventions are included where they're a factor affecting the feasibility of that infrastructure solution. While I totally see the value of having land use planning options included, as well as policy interventions, outreach and engagement interventions, we are supported through Housing, Infrastructure and Communities Canada, who have a mandate around infrastructure and housing. So our priority has been the focus of infrastructure and engineered both gray and natural solutions. We're trying to build in where we can the policy interventions that make it most feasible to implement. The one area where I think it's a bit of gray is around managed retreat on the adaptation side. So this idea of relocation of entire communities and not just individual assets. One could make an argument that that's much more a policy intervention, but we have included that as an infrastructure option. So I think it's a very great comment, and perhaps the more people that tell us that this is something they'd like to see, the more wiggle room we'd have and the more defense to include it. But right now it's been included within infrastructure options.
There's one new question that came in that just sort of made me laugh, because typically when Eva has done these demos in the past, she always uses Brandon, Manitoba as an example. And we have a question here saying that they couldn't quite figure out the infrastructure layers of Brandon, Manitoba. So I thought this might be a good opportunity for you to jump in.
To showcase my Brandon love.
Yeah.
Brandon is typically the location that I choose, so I'm happy to showcase that, and I hope it is working. Here we are in Brandon. So right now you can see there's some bridges and tunnels shown here. So we've got the 18th Street footbridge. I don't know Brandon too well, but maybe this person can attest to that. And you could then reselect public transit, which that doesn't seem to be showing. I thought that Brandon did have a public transit system. You may have caught us with something that's not working super well. Well, there we go. We've got solid waste showing. Maybe Josh or Sherry, I'll ask you to double check on your machines, but it does seem to be working. So this might be a reporting issue as well. You do, Lindsay. Thank you very much for letting us know you have. I could have sworn that worked before. So this might be something we'd have to look into, because in previous versions, I've used Brandon as the example, and it's always shown a public transit stop. So we will look into that. Thank you for bringing that up.
Perfect. I think all the other questions, either Josh is currently typing answers, Or
There's
they're
one
specific.
question I'd love to answer, Adrian, which is
Yeah,
around the
please.
help desk. And Eliana had a question here of, is the help desk function mostly about supporting users with the platform or Climate Insight, or broader? And it really is much broader. It isn't about supporting users with how to use the site. It's rather, it's meant to be a call and answer or email and answer with staff working at Housing Infrastructure and Communities Canada on individual questions. So you may find something on Climate Insight and want more information about, is there a funding program at HICC that could support this? Or is there a tool that HICC has supported that could help with this? Or, I want to understand, the PIVC protocol better. Can you put me in touch with the folks that have run PIVC workshops and PIVC seminars? So it's really not about supporting the use of this website, but more supporting climate ready or climate-based infrastructure and housing. The climate roster of experts, which you may have heard about now remarked as climate ready infrastructure services, is again about that matchmaking service between a municipal practitioner and a consultant with a specific question. So I think you can see that we're trying to help make that question more specific through the information provided through Climate Insight, as well as essentially to make that question not be, I need to think about climate risk, what do I do? But I'm thinking about fluvial risk in my community with regard to roads. I'm considering, these erosion controls. Can you help me understand how do I get this implemented? Or what feasibility studies I would need to have done? Sorry, Adrian.
No, that was perfect. I was actually going to tee you up to answer that exactly. And Josh, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I guess if you do need support with the website itself, though, feel free to reach out through the website. And yeah, either, I guess Adrian's probably the best one, or Eva's got the, the info at, of course. Info at climateinsight.ca if you need any help desk support for the website itself. I can jump in. There's a couple other map ones as well. It got flashed off, but I was going to answer live about the gaps in the social vulnerability index, and Eva mentioned that as part of her answer a couple answers ago, that we are taking that data from Stats Canada as it exists in the CIMD. And there's different things that they use as exclusion criteria. It's if less than 50% of a dissemination area reports, they don't put data for that because they consider it invalid. And if there are less than 40 reports as well in a dissemination area, that gets into the privacy piece. So yeah, there are certainly some gray areas, and that's one of the things that we're looking to address by breaking that out in future releases, to have that data presented in a different way where you can kind of select the determinants that are most important to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Josh. And
yep, go ahead.
Oh no, please finish off.
I was going to also answer one about how are you going to populate surface temperature data for these area maps? And I think that's maybe asking where the data came from for our layer of extreme heat. If that's incorrect, please let me know by popping another question in the Q&A there. But that again, I'd sort of point to the data sources and methodology page on the site to kind of get into the weeds on that. But it is coming from climate modeling that's done through, let's see, CCCS, and now of course I'm forgetting their acronym.
Canadian Centre for Climate Services.
Thank you. And it's the data that's available on climatedata.ca. So hopefully that answers that question.
And then I think the last map related question was around adding a layer for possible urban flood or real-time flooding during extreme weather events. The climate data that we're using now with our friends at CCCS, we've chosen these as proxy information where we don't have national hazard maps for all perils. So there's been a lot of talk around national flood hazard maps being released. I imagine that once those are released through Public Safety Canada, that is what we would integrate here. So we wouldn't have proxy information around precipitation. We would actually put in the hazard maps. As you can imagine, that would be most relevant when thinking about an infrastructure decision and flood hazard, for example. This was, for lack of a better term, a bit of a band-aid to allow some climate information to be stacked on socioeconomic considerations as well as infrastructure information. But as I hope we are making clear, we are at the beginning of our journey, and so we imagine these layers will change. We're now investigating getting energy poverty data as a layer in here. So the percentage of income households are spending on energy to have, for example, a mitigation side data set in here to not make it entirely around adaptation. So we are exploring all sorts of new data sets, and I really would encourage you, if there's pieces that if you own a data set and you're open to having us include that, or if you have experience with a data set and you'd like us to include that, to really get in touch, because that is the if we bring anything kind of home in these last couple of minutes, it's just around that piece. We really want to make this usable for Canadians making these decisions, and we can only do that if we find out from you what it is that you're lacking, and then explore how we can resource getting that brought into one central spot.
Wonderful. So we have just 2 minutes left. I thought it might be nice, Eva, if you have a list on hand, to go through some of the things that we expect to come out in the very next release so people know what's coming up next. Oh, and you're muted there, Eva.
I'm on mute. I've had a whole conversation with myself. Yeah, some of the things that are on deck for release 2, we are, as I had mentioned, the login and save feature to make it easy to save those. So if you lose your bookmarks or you close a window, you're not going to lose everything. A search feature so that if you're in a hurry and you just want to, type in some words and not go through the library or the solutions finder, you can search for that. We are adding in, I didn't have a chance to show folks the baseline emissions calculator, but we're adding in some more sectors into that calculator, as well as what I had quickly mentioned, that idea that instead of just getting a curated list of options, that they'll be sorted by relevance. So you'll have to answer a few more questions in that decision tree, but the options will be sorted by, we're thinking a percentage relevance based on what you've told us. So you're not randomly choosing between 16 options, but kind of have 4 that are above 80% relevant and 3 that are 50% relevant, or however that gets presented. I will say the other pieces that happen in an ongoing way are just adding more options, more case studies, more tools and codes and standards. I quickly mentioned the energy poverty, that we're thinking about how that could be included into the map, as well as breaking out that amalgamated index of social vulnerability into individual layers that ideally could be stacked. So somebody asked the question around multiple hazards. We might want to look at multiple social determinants of health. So we could look at income and newcomer status, or age and income, and understand that better. I just see somebody's asking if this will be posted online. It will be, right, Adrian? It'll be posted on climateinsight.ca, and you'll be able to access it there. And I think we can try to share a link with those folks who have registered. So in case there's people who registered but weren't able to attend. I thank you for your time. I'm bang on 2 o'clock here. I apologize that it was only the dulcet tones of my voice, but we are supported by a great team. You heard quickly from Josh and Sherry, who are two directors on our team, and Adrian and Curtis, who are in our communications group, and we're all standing by, ready to hear from you. So thank you very much for coming, and we hope to hear from you soon.